We thought he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. Do you hear the disappointment in their voice as they're walking on the road? 3 days after the crucifixion, the horror that they've experienced, they just can't believe it. Ever been disappointed with God? If you have, I would just say this: you are not here by accident this morning. God wants all of us, I think, to hear, how do we manage through disappointment with God? And it depends on the background that you come out of. It might seem almost sacrilegious to say something like that. Do we really verbalize the fact that maybe we're disappointed with God at some point? If the truth were known, I think we probably all have been there at some point. Yes or no? In recent years, it's been a well-established genre that has been created in social media. It's called the Instagram Deconversion announcement. And it usually goes something like this. You have a very somber, sober-looking self-portrait of someone, and underneath the Instagram it says, "I never thought I would say this. It's terrifying to post this, but I'm no longer a Christian." It can be a high-profile former evangelical author like Josh Harris, or a megachurch pastor like Jim Palmer, or a CCM star, Christian contemporary music star like Michael Gungor. It could be somebody you know. But they come on Instagram and they make this announcement, this public announcement, that they are walking away from the faith because they are so disappointed in what this whole Christian experience has been. It goes by a term, deconstruction. Anybody recognize that terminology? The deconstruction of the faith. They're deeply disappointed and they've decided they just don't believe anymore. Having taught university for 20 years, I have seen this phenomenon even before Instagram. 60% of people raised in Christian churches deconstruct their faith after high school. And that is, they begin to rethink, wow, what do I really believe? Am I just living on my parents' faith or what I've just always heard? And they go through this really wrestling time where they find out, what do I really believe? For 20 years, I taught urban ministry at the university level. And for 20 years, I taught urban ministry to white, upper middle class suburbanites who were raised in white families, lived in white communities, attended white churches with white Christian schools, and committed basically to a white Jesus. And then when they came to my class, they spent a whole semester where I took a deep dive with them into what God has to say about his love for the city, the love for justice, his concern for not only spiritual issues, but social issues, his concern for the poor and the marginalized, the abuse of power by the abuse of the powerless by the powerful, structural sin, not just personal sin, and it rattled them. So much so, they would come to me often in my office and say, listen, I have been in church my whole life. I was raised in Sunday school. I was raised in church. I was in church on Wednesday evening. Why have I never heard this stuff before? It rattled them. And they began to see that in this crisis of faith, maybe, this is what on more than one occasion folks have told me, I feel like I have been steeped in a flag-waving, suburban, white, middle-class, conservative version of Jesus and Christianity. And they have gotten their understanding of the faith far more from talk show hosts than they have from the Bible. And they say, at that point, this Jesus that I have been raised to believe in is not who I thought he was when I look at Scripture. You understand where I'm going with this? And it's a deep disappointment, and they have to seriously rethink what they believe about Jesus. I think in Luke chapter 24, that's exactly the situation that we have. I don't know if we can, this is the last part of it, but in Luke 24, these guys are walking along this dusty road, deeply grieved over the fact that Jesus, all the eggs they put in his basket, Gone. Here's the text. Now that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking with each other about everything that had happened. And as they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus himself came up and walked alongside of them, but they were kept from recognizing him. You remember the text? So he joins them as they're walking. They don't recognize that it's Jesus, resurrected. And he asked them, what are you discussing together as you walk along? And they stood still, their faces downcast. And one of them, named Cleopas, asked him, are you the only one visiting Jerusalem who does not know these things that have happened here in these days? And Jesus quizzes them. What things? About Jesus of Nazareth, they replied. He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and all the people. The chief priests and our rulers, though, handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. We had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. What's more, it's the third day since all this took place. In addition, some of the women amazed us. They went to the tomb early in the morning but didn't find his body. They came and told us they had seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. And then some of our companions went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they didn't see Jesus. They are incredulous that there is somebody in Jerusalem who doesn't know that this has taken place and that Jesus is gone in their understanding. Why were they disappointed? Why were they discouraged? What brought them to the place where they were downcast and discouraged? If you know the experience of first century Israel at this point, they had steeped their entire lives in the wrong understanding of who the Messiah was to come. They lived under Roman oppression. They lived in the context of the Roman garrisons, Roman soldiers, Roman taxes, the oppressive atmosphere of living under the boot of Rome, so to speak. And so they understood the coming Messiah was going to be a political deliverer. He was going to come and crush Rome, and he was going to throw this Roman oppression off of them. They would be reestablished to the Solomonic era, golden era, where they would be in power again. And so their cultural expectation is that he's going to be a political ruler. He's going to be a conquering Messiah of Rome. He's going to make Israel great again. We thought he was going to do this, but he didn't deliver. You can hear it in your voice, in their voices, can't you? I can't tell you in 40 years of ministry how many conversations I've heard that phraseology from people who are deeply discouraged, overwhelmed, disenchanted people because Jesus let them down. They felt like he didn't do what they wanted him to do. And so conversations like that go something like this. Listen, Jesus has let me down. This is where the Instagram accounts come up. Jesus has let me down. My whole life I trusted Jesus. And I believed that if I just lived a life of purity and obedience, he would give me a godly spouse by the time I graduated from college. And here I am, 37. And I come home to an empty apartment every night. Don't tell me that Jesus cares about me. The greatest disappointment in my life has been my divorce. I prayed that God would preserve my marriage, and he didn't. Countless couples over 40 years of ministry have pleaded with God for a child. That's all they ever wanted, is to have a child. And they would say, this is our 5th miscarriage. Why would he deny that to us? Why does he taunt us? Disappointment runs deep. As I said, I had pancreatic cancer 5 years ago. Thankfully, with a 10% survival rate, for some reason, inexplicable to me, God preserved my life. But he doesn't always. Sometimes people pray and pray. I'm a chaplain at a hospital, Swedish hospital. And a lot of people pray and pray that God would spare the life of their loved one, and he doesn't. Jesus, you are not who I thought you were. I have to rethink what it means to follow you, to see if I trust you. Now I'm going to ask is we just sit in that tension for a little bit. And don't be too quick to give an answer of, well, all they need to do is. The fact of the matter is, I think all of us, if we're honest, have been at the point where we were overwhelmingly disappointed that God didn't give us what we thought he would. It's not a bad thing to take apart your faith and ask some hard questions. Deconstruction is not the same as rejecting Jesus. Deconstructing is taking the pieces apart and saying, what do I really believe about Jesus? There is such a thing as demolition. Some people are disappointed in Jesus and just pitch the whole thing overboard. That's demolition. That's walking away from the faith. I'm talking about taking apart our faith and saying, what do I really believe that Scripture teaches about who Jesus is? He's not just a cosmic Santa Claus that's going to give me what I want. So it's not necessarily bad to deconstruct your faith. Martin Luther deconstructed Catholicism, and that's why we have Protestants. That's why we're here this morning, then we're not Catholic. Jesus deconstructed Judaism in his day. You have heard it said, but I say to you. What's he doing? He's taking them away from what they thought he was like or what they thought God was like to give them another understanding of that. Today, I think many people are deconstructing their faith because they're forced to, because they find, like my students, that they've been trusting in a Jesus that is of the cultural construct rather than a biblical construct. They find out that, at least in their experience, this white American cultural middle-class Santa Claus that they have expected him to be isn't that at all. Many people are leaving church, as a matter of fact, as a second option, not because they have lost their faith, but to preserve it, because they find that the church they're in has that kind of a model of Jesus, that it's really a cultural American middle-class suburban Jesus who is, who was it that said, if God hates all the same people you do, you have created God in your own image. So they're not leaving church. Many folks are not leaving church for liberalism or because people walk. It's because of the hypocrisy of evangelicalism. They have heard, am I exposing too much of my background here? This is what I've been reacting to for the past 40 years. Majority culture folks who sing red, brown, yellow, black, and white, they are precious in his sight. Do you know that song? But they don't live that. They're the ones who are the most supportive of sometimes racist and nationalistic and political positions. At least in this generation, people aren't stupid. In this generation, young folks recognize that much of the church has traded all that they say they believe in the Bible for political power. They're rejecting not Christianity, they're rejecting a false Christianity. They're walking away not from a Jesus, they're walking away from a caricature of Jesus. To doubt is not necessarily bad. To be forced to reconstruct. Doubt is not always a sign that a man is wrong, someone said. It may be a sign that he is thinking. Kicking the tires doesn't mean you hate the car. Now we're having a little trouble. I usually have control of my PowerPoint and stuff like that. So poor Mike, everybody else is trying to work. I don't know what's going on behind me, so you just have to. But let me just say this. For people to get to the point where they doubt some things and have to deconstruct some things, that's not a bad thing. Part of it is understanding how faith develops. And so look at these steps here. Stage 1 of faith development is simplicity. That is, people who are free from doubt. You understand what I mean by that? It's like you have a strong parent or you have a strong pastor, and what they say, you just accept at face value. It's like, of course, they say it, I believe it. Everything is black and white and absolutes. We expect that in young faith. There's a danger in it, though, and some of you have experienced this in your Christian life. An authoritative leader can use that to exploit people, or a pastor, to just say, listen, don't question anything. Just take what I'm telling you as absolute. Leaders who believe they have a perfect understanding on everything and that any questioning in them is a threat produces arrested development in the followers. If stage 1 is simplicity, faith free from doubt, stage 2 is complexity, faith managing doubt. And here's what I mean by that. Once a person has kind of the simple answers down, yes, Jesus is the Son of God, man is a sinner, we have to respond to him by faith. They got the basic stuff down. But they want to go deeper now at this stage. And those of you who have been around the block in your faith know what this means. Now they want to go deeper. Now they have questions beyond just the simple answers. For example, now I have friends of different cultures, or friends with different worldviews, or friends with different religions. They have some international experience, and they find out, wow, once I get outside of the echo chamber of people who are just like me, I have some bigger questions. So they begin to question, for example, not a bad thing. You have done this, I think. They question whether the Bible has a clear answer for everything, as a person who has just come to faith believes. I mean, why do people say the Bible is inerrant? Why are certain things right or wrong? I understand what you're telling me, this is what the Bible says, but why? Why do some folks say only men can be pastors? What does it mean to say God hates divorce, but I'm divorced? Does God hate me? And if I divorced my spouse because he was sexually abusing our daughters, what do I make of that to say God hates divorce? Should I have stayed with him? Should I have allowed that to go on? What does the Bible have to say about those kinds of things? What do we do with the fact that Jesus put his disciples into the boat and that he sent them into a storm? Is God behind? Does God sometimes send me the troubles that I find myself in? What do we do with the fact that many of the people that we hold up as examples of faith had glaring character issues? Moses, who had an anger problem. David, who is marked by sexual sin. Abraham, a liar. Jacob, a deceiver. Help me to understand some of that stuff. Don't just tell me simply that Jesus loves me. I got a few more answers that I need. To be totally committed to following Jesus, to following God, landed Joseph in prison. It landed Paul in jail. Half of the New Testament is written from a jail cell, not because Paul was a felon, but because he was following God. So at stage 2, here's my point. At stage 2, there's no amount of learning that can fix all the questions I have about faith. And the church, of all places, ought to be a place where we can voice honest doubts and wrestle through issues. The church has somehow become dysfunctional if the church is the only place where I can't ask some hard questions without feeling that somehow I'm abandoning the faith. Stage 3 is maturity. Faith in the midst of doubt. I'll just tell you, I don't know, I may be the oldest person in the room, I don't know, maybe not. But I found the farther I go in the faith, the fewer and fewer hills I'm willing to die on. There's some, you know what I mean by that? Is like I recognize that there are a lot of issues in the following God in the midst of this. And I don't necessarily have all the answers. Job, had some real answers, had some real questions for God that he doesn't get answers to by the end of the book. Recognize that there are some naive assumptions about Christians in the church at large. David and Abraham are not the only one with glaring character weaknesses. People that we look to in the contemporary church, people like, are you up on this stuff? Bill Hybels and Ravi Zacharias and, some of the glaring issues that are there. The guy who led me to the Lord went to prison. The guy who was my financial advisor in the church where I was went to prison for financial fraud. So there are some issues at large with the family of God, right? The Bible has been used to justify genocide of Native Americans. You know, it was Christians who used the Bible to say that America was the promised land and the American Indians were the Canaanites that needed to be obliterated. Those were Christians making those arguments. It was the Bible that was used by Christians to justify slavery and oppression of women and 1,001 other issues. Disappointment with some things that I understand of what I think the church ought to be, or what I think Jesus ought to be. It's a wrestling match to find out, what do I really hold to? If stage one is faith and accept all that I'm told, stage two is faith where I believe that there are questions, but they can be answered. Stage three faith is even the answers need to be questioned. That's not an attack on the faith. That's not an attack on the Bible. That is what Jesus is driving his guys on the road to Emmaus to say. Listen, I know these are things that you have been deeply committed to, but there are some things that you maybe need to rethink. So here's what he does. There's reconstruction. If demolition is taking apart what I believe and finding out, wow, this isn't supported by Scripture at all. Reconstruction is very crucially important. And what I mean by that is this. Here's what Jesus didn't do. Follow me on this. Don't hear me saying something I'm not. Jesus recognized that they had lifelong believed wrong things about him. What he doesn't say to them when they come to this realization that they're deeply disappointed in him, what he doesn't say, he doesn't encourage them to simply walk away. He doesn't encourage them to say, listen, just step back, look to yourself, figure out your own truth. You do you. He doesn't say that. What does he do? He drives them back to Scripture. Don't you see that these things had to happen? That the Messiah had to suffer and only then enter into his glory? Listen to this phrase. Then he started at the beginning with the book of Moses and went on through all the prophets, pointing out everything in the Scriptures that referred to him. You see the significance of that? He says, you're mistaken. You have drawn some wrong conclusions. But he takes them to the Bible to explain who he really is. Reconstruction can be a deeply meaningful place of growth. I think we have to avoid people that want to just simply demolish the faith. There are people who will simply attack Christianity because of the examples that they see in the news or because of some disappointment they have had with God. And they say, listen, that stuff doesn't work. Just pitch it. I think we have to avoid those people. That's like, if your intent is to demolish, any sledgehammer will do. But to reconstruct faith that has been deeply disappointed is like art reconstruction. Helping people to recover their faith. What is Christian faith really at? What is it at its core? Apart from all the cultural grid through which Jesus has been put to make him look American middle class or whatever. I was reading one guy who was wrestling through with this and the danger of just walking away from it all. He says, I kept listening and reading, and I realized I didn't have the tools to rebuild. And I wasn't receiving any guidance from these voices that were telling him to just walk away. Helping people to deconstruct their faith without helping them put it back together again is lazy, irresponsible, dangerous, and isolating. The goal of deconstruction should be greater faithfulness to Jesus. And so we need churches to become places where, regardless of where folks are, construction, deconstruction, or reconstruction, we can pray together, walk together, people who can wrestle with their doubts and questions, and where doubters can embrace the faith and the faithful can honestly embrace their doubts. And he said this, we don't need coroners in the church, we need surgeons. You get the difference? We don't need someone pronouncing the time of death for Christianity. We need folks who will, like in the hospital, help people recover from when they have found themselves in a tough spot. So here's a blueprint for Reconstruction. Let me give you 3 or 4 principles that I think in 40 years of ministry I've tried to hold out to people, that when they're wrestling with disappointment with God, that they have been holding on to things that this is what I thought Jesus was like, this is what I thought God was like, and it turns out he's nothing like that. Well, don't pitch the baby out with the bathwater. Here's a couple things to think about. Number 1, if we're going to reconstruct faith, we have to practice being wrong. You know what I mean by that? We have to have a willingness to admit that we have had wrong understanding of some stuff, and to be willing to repent of that and to relearn who he really is. These guys were struggling because they had believed wrong things about Jesus for the longest time. They thought he was going to deliver them from Roman oppression. It was a different Jesus that they were believing in. When you believe something passionately, it can produce arrogance and pride and an unwillingness to change. I don't want to change what I believe. I just want to pitch the whole thing overboard. The church, frankly, has had to confess. Are you with me on this? The church has had to confess wrong positions for centuries. The church has at various times embraced a flat earth, that the earth was the center of the universe, that the Bible justified slavery, right? This is not new information to us. Justified genocide of Native Americans. At various points in the flow of history, the church has had to say, we had it wrong. But what? We have to learn what is right. The danger when our faith gets rocked is that we can get prideful and just assume, okay, everybody else is wrong, I don't accept it. I'm gonna create my own truth. Jesus doesn't do that. He takes them back to Scripture and teaches them who he really is. So number 1, we have to fess up when we recognize, okay, yeah, I've had a wrong understanding of expectations of God in my life. Number 2, don't walk away from the Word. Jesus takes them to Scripture. What were they missing? They needed fresh eyes and a fresh voice. The temptation is, when we get frustrated, is to pitch the Bible overboard. To say, I read the Bible, it doesn't work, it didn't work in my life, and so therefore that's why I have walked away. That's why my Instagram account says what it does. Jesus doesn't allow them to walk away from the Word. Number 3, don't walk away from the supportive community and relationships who can help us with our disappointment. The tendency is to withdraw from people, especially if we feel like when I voice my doubts, I get criticized for it, right? Sometimes the harshest criticism can come from other Christians who want to attack you because you say, hey, what do I do with this? Because this aspect of faith doesn't seem to be working. And then we shout those people down. No. And if I feel like when I voice my doubts that I'm going to be attacked for it, I just withdraw. We need people around us. We need a community around us who will help us process the things that we wrestle with. Trustworthy people. Older people who have been down the road a few years, whose faith is steady, not threatened by doubts. Number 4, accept and embrace the process of disillusionment. Disillusionment is part of the journey of the Christian life. Because unless you think that everything you now know is the perfect understanding of all of Christianity, the fact is there are things that you have learned and absorbed about God that are not true. Believe that? And there are things, before I can continue to learn and grow, sometimes I have to unlearn stuff that I have learned in the church and from other Christians. We have been given false messages about God at various points along the line, and we have to figure out where have I been trusting in wrong things about God or Jesus? And I have to unlearn that stuff. I had a woman in the first church I pastored whose sister was Down syndrome. She was the older sister. Younger sister was Down syndrome. And she was in a church denomination she said, I grew up my whole life with people in my church telling me, if you just had enough faith, your sister would be healed. Now imagine, you're a 12-year-old and you see your sister who is mentally handicapped, Down syndrome, and every day you get up believing that she stays sick and it's your fault. That's wrong theology. She had to unlearn that. But you understand my point. She had to wrestle through, she had to unlearn some things. So a lot of people have been trusting God for stuff that he never promised, such as that. Do I really believe that if I just follow Jesus, he'll never disappoint me? That he will always give me what I want? Do I honestly believe that I will never have to go through a difficulty or a trial? I have to trust God, that I have to trust his love for me is absolute in the long run. And so some of the disappointments that I face is because I have believed wrong things, and he just wants me to unlearn those and to learn some right things. Disillusionment is a gift from God. He refuses to let us continue to believe in stuff that he never promised. Disappointment is part of deconstruction and reconstruction. So part of mature faith, mature trust, is learning to be disappointed that the process God takes us through is for our good. Even those deep, dark spots are part of our faith journey. Let me finish with this. Remember the feeding of the 5,000? Jesus, there's probably 15,000. Howard just taught on this, didn't he? Feeding of the 5,000. Probably 15,000 people on the hillside. And Jesus multiplies and he feeds them all. And they say, oh, give us this evermore. They love the idea of a free lunch. You know? And on the heels of this feeding of the 5,000, he teaches, I am the bread of life. He's drawing a spiritual implication of that. Well, when he went from offering them to do this to say, follow me, I'm the bread of life, within 24 hours, the crowd of 15,000 dwindles down to 12. Why? Because they wanted what he would give them, but they didn't want him. And so Jesus puts them on the spot where he says, it dwindles down to 12. And he says to them, you going to go away too? And how did they respond? Jesus, to whom shall we go? Where are we going to go if we walk away from you? Where are we going to go? In the midst of disappointment, in the midst of difficulties, I don't know what you're facing. Relational, financial, health, all of us face profoundly difficult times. And sometimes we have been trusting God to do some things in response to that he's never promised. The question is, can I trust him even when I don't understand where all this is going, even in the dark? Because if I walk away from Jesus, where am I going to go? Some people see that as an option. Disappointed with God? Pitch it. What Jesus says is, don't leave me. Don't leave me. Don't leave the word. Don't leave the community of believers. This is part of the experience of having our roots go deep in Jesus. So disappointment is real. It just can't be the defining characteristic of the trajectory of my life. Does that make sense? Let me pray for us. Father, we are acutely aware in our own hearts that there have been times in our walk with you in which we wished you would have done something different than what happened. some things that you have allowed to happen, some things that you have caused even to bring us along in our spiritual growth that we haven't understood. I pray, God, for the patience and the willingness to have our eyes opened by a patient exploration of the truth of your word, the encouragement of other believers around us in community that have gone down this road of discouragement and found that it's not the end, that you bring us through difficulties and come out on the other side, that you want to galvanize our faith, that you want to imprint on our DNA spiritual depth and truth that will hold in all of the storms of life. When we have followed a road of error and believed things about you that weren't necessarily true, God, give us repentant hearts, willingness to change, willingness to learn. And I pray that you would strengthen your people, your church, in such a way that the world around us, not only each of us, but the world around us will sense that you're not a caricature, that you're not a cultural development of someone's hope, but that you are a sovereign, true God who wants us to know you as you really are. Would you chip away at our character in that direction? I ask that in the name of Jesus. Amen.